The 911 dispatcher's voice remained professionally calm despite the panic pulsing through the caller's words. "Ma'am, please repeat that slowly." "There's blood on my neighbor's porch," Deborah Jenkins whispered, her 70-year-old voice trembling. "The door's open, and I heard shouting, then nothing. And now that dog is standing there, his face covered in blood." "What dog, ma'am?" "The German Shepherd, the one with the disfigurement. He belongs to Lieutenant Cooper's daughter. He's always looked aggressive. But now, oh God, there's so much blood. Is anyone injured that you can see?" "Just the dog in the doorway. Caroline's away at a conference and her father's working. What if someone came by and that dog just snapped?" The dispatcher's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Officers are en route. Please stay inside your home." What they would find inside would change everything the neighborhood thought they knew about the monster living among them. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Max had not always been feared. Once. His presence brought comfort rather than concern to the residents of Oak Ridge Lane. A proud German Shepherd, with intelligence shining in his amber eyes, his sleek black and tan coat gleaming in the California sunshine. He'd been the neighborhood's unofficial mascot, the heroic police K-9 who lived at number 42 with Lieutenant James Cooper, one of Oak Ridge's finest. That was before the knife, before the raid on the meth house where a desperate criminal had slashed Max's face while he protected his handler, before 3 surgeries failed to repair the severed facial nerves that left the right side of his muzzle in a permanent snarl. His lip pulled back to expose gleaming teeth in what looked like perpetual aggression. Lieutenant Cooper, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that had seen too much, had fought the department's decision to retire Max. "He can still work," Cooper had argued. "His capabilities haven't changed." But police work was also public relations, and Max's appearance now frightened witnesses and children. The same department that had awarded him medals for bravery had deemed him a liability. The betrayal had aged Cooper, adding lines to his weathered face. When his daughter Caroline, a veterinary student with her father's sense of justice and her late mother's gentle determination, offered to take Max while Cooper worked long hours, it seemed the best solution. Carolyn understood Max in ways others couldn't. She saw past the disfigurement to the hero beneath. Not everyone shared her vision. Martha Wilson, the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain with carefully styled silver hair and a collection of cardigans for every occasion, had started a petition. "Dangerous animals don't belong near children," she'd declared at the last community meeting. No matter what that dog did before, look at him now. Deborah Jenkins, Martha's across-the-street neighbor and sometimes friend, was one of the few who defended Max. "That dog saved lives," the 70-year-old widow had countered, "including James Cooper's. We owe him better than fear." Their debate had divided Oak Ridge Lane into invisible territories. Some residents crossed the street rather than pass Caroline's front yard, where Max often lay watching the world through wary eyes. Others made a point to greet him, though many hesitated when his attempt to smile in return transformed his face into something from a nightmare. What no one questioned was Max's devotion to Caroline and Lieutenant Cooper, the only family he had left in a world that had turned its back on him. The morning had started like any other for Max. He'd watched from his cushioned bed in the corner of the kitchen as Caroline packed her overnight bag. his intelligent eyes tracking her movements with the focused attention that had once made him exceptional at his job. "It's just one night, Maxie," Carolyn had assured him, kneeling to cup his face in her hands. Unlike others, she never hesitated to touch the scarred side, her fingertips gentle against the damaged tissue. "The veterinary conference ends tomorrow afternoon, and then I'll be straight home." Max had pressed his good side against her palm, understanding more than she realized. 8 years of police training had given him an impressive vocabulary. Conference meant Caroline would be gone longer than usual. Night meant she wouldn't sleep in her bed. His ears had drooped slightly, but he'd maintained his composure. German shepherds weren't bred to be clingy. "Dad's working a double shift, but he'll stop by in the morning to let you out," she'd continued, scratching behind his ears the way he loved. "And Mrs. Jenkins will check on you this evening." At the familiar name, Max's tail had given a hopeful thump against the floor. Mrs. Jenkins always brought treats that smelled of peanut butter. "Guard the house," Caroline had said finally, pressing a kiss to his forehead. The command settled something in Max's chest. This, at least, was a purpose he could still fulfill. He'd watched from the window as her blue Honda backed out of the driveway, lifting a paw in farewell when she waved. Then he'd settled into his routine, a circuit of the house, checking each window and door as he'd been trained to do, before curling up on the couch technically forbidden. But Caroline never truly enforced the rule for his morning nap. The sound came at 2:17 p.m., a faint scraping at the back door that pulled Max instantly from sleep. His ears swiveled forward, body tensing as he slid silently from the couch to the floor. This wasn't the confident knock of Mrs. Jenkins or the familiar tread of Lieutenant Cooper. This was something else. Max padded silently to the kitchen, nails clicking softly on the hardwood despite his attempt at stealth. Through the small window beside the back door, he could see 2 men strangers, their faces partially obscured by the brim of baseball caps. One was working something metal into the door jamb while the other kept watch, eyes scanning the neighboring yards. Old instincts flared to life. In his prime, Max would have been barking now, alerting anyone nearby to the threat. But years of police training had also taught him strategic silence. Sometimes the element of surprise was more valuable than an early warning. The lock clicked. The door eased open. Max backed into the shadows of the dining room, body lowered, watching. "Quick sweep first," the taller man muttered. "Make sure no one's home." "Place is empty," his companion replied, stepping fully into the kitchen. "Single woman. Works during the day. Neighbor said she's at some conference." Max's hackles rose. They had been watching Caroline, planning this. "Check for jewelry, electronics, cash," the first man directed. "I'll take the bedroom." They moved with practiced efficiency, suggesting this wasn't their first home invasion. The shorter man began rifling through drawers in the living room while his partner headed down the hallway toward Caroline's bedroom. Max followed the hallway intruder, moving silently on padded feet, keeping to the shadows. The man was touching Caroline's things, pulling open her jewelry box, pocketing the modest silver pieces her mother had left her before passing away from cancer 3 years ago. The treasured keepsakes Caroline sometimes held when she thought no one was watching. Something cold and certain settled in Max's mind. These men were not leaving with Caroline's memories in the living room. The second intruder had discovered Lieutenant Cooper's service awards displayed in a modest case on the wall. "Hey, Troy, this chick's old man is a cop." The man in the bedroom, Troy, froze. "What you said this was an easy mark. Look at this stuff, medals, certificates. We gotta go. Now." Troy shoved the jewelry into his pocket and turned toward the door, only to find his exit blocked by 90 pounds of German shepherd, standing silent and still as a statue. For one heartbeat, nothing moved in the room. Then Troy's eyes widened as he registered the exposed teeth on the right side of Max's face. The apparent snarl that had nothing to do with the dog's current emotion but everything to do with the scar tissue that had permanently altered his appearance. "Holy sh..." Troy began, reaching behind his back. Max didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. 8 years of police training launched him forward with precision and purpose. He didn't aim for the throat as fear might suggest he would. Max had been trained to subdue, not kill. His target was the man's forearm enough to disable without causing life-threatening damage. His teeth closed around Troy's wrist just as the man's hand emerged with a switchblade. Troy screamed, the knife clattering to the carpet as Max's momentum drove him backward against the dresser. Framed photos crashing to the floor. The commotion brought the second burglar running. "Troy, what the—" He skidded to a halt at the bedroom doorway, taking in the scene his partner pinned by a snarling shepherd, blood beginning to seep through the sleeve of Troy's dark hoodie. "Get this thing off me!" Troy screamed, thrashing ineffectively. The second man grabbed a decorative vase from the hallway table and hurled it at Max. The impact against his shoulder startled the shepherd enough to loosen his grip momentarily. Troy scrambled away, clutching his bleeding arm. "Run!" he shouted to his partner. But Max had positioned himself between the men and the hallway exit. As they backed away, he advanced, herding them like the sheep his ancestors had been bred to control, driving them toward the kitchen and away from Caroline's treasured possessions. The second burglar grabbed a fireplace poker they'd passed in the living room. "I'll handle this," he growled, swinging the metal rod with vicious intent. Max dodged the first swing, decades of selective breeding giving him an agility that belied his size. The second swing caught him across the muzzle, the impact sending a burst of pain through the already damaged nerve endings on the right side of his face. Blood welled from the fresh cut, but Max didn't retreat. If anything, the injury only intensified his determination. These men had invaded his territory, threatened his family's belongings, and now drawn his blood. His training might have taught him restraint, but some instincts ran deeper than training, with a low growl that seemed to vibrate the air between them. Max launched himself at the poker-wielding intruder. His weight and momentum carried them both to the ground in the living room, the poker skittering across the hardwood floor as they fell. Max's teeth found purchase on the man's shoulder again, a disabling target rather than a lethal one. Troy had staggered to the front door, fumbling with the unfamiliar lock, his wounded arm dripping blood onto the entryway tile. The door finally swung open, revealing the front porch and the escape route beyond just as Max's current opponent landed a solid kick to the shepherd's ribs, creating enough space to scramble away. The two burglars collided at the doorway in their haste to escape, more blood smearing across the white porch railing as they struggled against each other. Max was on his feet again, advancing with purpose, herding them onto the porch. Only when they had stumbled down the front steps did Max halt his pursuit, standing guard at the open doorway. Blood from the cut on his muzzle dripped onto the porch boards, his chest heaving with exertion. but his posture remained vigilant. From the street, all anyone would see was a blood-covered German shepherd with a terrifying facial disfigurement, standing menacingly in an open doorway. Behind him, the house was in disarray, furniture overturned in the struggle, drops of blood marking the path of conflict, the metallic scent of fear and violence hanging in the air. But nothing had been stolen. No one had taken Caroline's treasured keepsakes or Lieutenant Cooper's medals of honor. Max had done his job. He had guarded the house. Deborah Jenkins had been deadheading her prized roses when the commotion started. At 70, her hearing wasn't what it once was, but even she couldn't miss the shouting from Caroline's house. She straightened slowly, one hand pressed against her lower back, and peered over the fence that separated their properties. Two men she'd never seen before were stumbling down Caroline's front steps, one clutching his arm, both moving with the frantic energy of fear. Blood stained the sleeve of the taller one's dark hoodie. Behind them, standing in the open doorway like an avenging angel, was Max. Even from this distance, Deborah could see the blood on his muzzle, dripping onto the pristine white porch. His powerful body was tense, hackles raised, focused entirely on the retreating men who were now sprinting down the street. "Oh, dear Lord," Deborah whispered, reaching for the phone in her gardening apron pocket with trembling fingers. Within minutes of her 911 call, Oak Ridge Lane transformed from a quiet suburban street to the center of neighborhood drama. Doors opened up and down the block as curious residents emerged to investigate the growing commotion. Martha Wilson arrived with her husband Frank in tow, their evening power walk interrupted by the gathering crowd. "I knew this would happen," Martha declared, arms folded across her chest as she surveyed the scene from a safe distance. "That animal was a ticking time bomb." "We don't know what happened yet," Deborah countered, though the sight of blood-spattered Max standing guard at the open door sent a chill down her spine despite her defense. By the time officers Ryan Peterson and Thomas Dawson arrived, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk across from Caroline's house. Their patrol car pulled up with lights flashing but sirens mercifully silent. Both officers emerged cautiously, taking in the scene, the open door, the blood on the porch, and most significantly, the large German shepherd standing alert in the doorway. "That's him," Martha informed Officer Dawson, who at 42 had the weathered look of a man who'd seen enough in his career to be perpetually unimpressed. "That's the dog everyone's been worried about. I filed a report last month about him frightening children." Officer Peterson, a decade younger with the earnest face of someone who still believed in the job, approached the gathered neighbors. "Can anyone tell me what happened here?" "I called it in." Deborah stepped forward. "I was gardening and heard shouting. Then I saw two men running from the house. They looked injured, and Max, the dog, he was at the door, covered in blood." "Where is the owner?" Dawson asked, hand resting casually near his holster as he eyed Max. "Caroline's at a veterinary conference until tomorrow," Deborah explained. "Her father, Lieutenant Cooper from the county sheriff's office, is working a double shift today." Recognition flickered across both officers' faces at Cooper's name. The law enforcement community in the area was close-knit. "That's Cooper's daughter's place," Peterson clarified. "And that's his former K-9, Dawson finished, his expression shifting slightly. "The one that got knifed protecting him during that raid in Oakland." The information rippled through the gathered neighbors. Many knew Cooper was in law enforcement, but the specific history of his partnership with Max wasn't common knowledge. "I don't care if it used to be a police dog," Martha interjected. "Look at it now. Blood all over. Looking like it's about to attack anyone who comes near. What if those men were just delivery people or something? Ma'am, we need to assess the situation," Peterson said diplomatically. He turned to his partner. "I'm going to approach the house." "Careful," Dawson warned. "That dog looks agitated." "Police!" Peterson called out, moving slowly toward the property. "Anyone inside?" Max's posture changed subtly at the authoritative voice. His ears, which had been flattened against his head, perked forward slightly. The police uniform seemed to register with him on some instinctual level. "Control your animal!" Dawson shouted when Max took a single step forward on the porch. Instead of advancing further, Max turned his head to look back into the house, then returned his gaze to the officers. He gave a single sharp bark, not aggressive, but alerting. "I think he wants us to follow him," Peterson said slowly. "Are you kidding me? That dog's face is covered in blood." Dawson objected, his hand now resting on his holster. "Wait," Deborah called, moving toward them with surprising speed for her age. "Let me try. He knows me. I check on him sometimes when Caroline's working late." The officers exchanged glances, then Peterson nodded. "Stay behind me, ma'am." As they approached the porch steps, Max's demeanor shifted again. His tail gave a brief, uncertain wag at the sight of Mrs. Jenkins. He backed up slightly, creating space in the doorway while maintaining his alertness. "It's okay, Maxie," Deborah said softly. "We're here to help." At the gentle words, something in Max's rigid posture eased fractionally. He turned and walked a few steps into the house, then looked back as if checking whether they were following. "He wants to show us something," Peterson murmured, drawing his weapon but keeping it pointed downward. "Mrs. Jenkins, please stay behind me." The interior of the house revealed clear signs of a struggle. A side table was overturned near the entryway. A lamp shattered on the hardwood floor. Blood droplets created a sporadic trail leading deeper into the house. Max padded ahead of them, his nails clicking on the floor as he led them toward the living room. There, slumped against the far wall, was a man in a dark hoodie, clutching his shoulder, his face pale with pain and fear. A metal fireplace poker lay on the floor nearby. "Police, don't move," Peterson commanded, his weapon now trained on the injured intruder. The man's eyes widened at the sight of Max returning with reinforcements. "Keep that monster away from me," he pleaded. "Dispatch. This is Officer Peterson. We have an injured suspect at 42 Oak Ridge Lane and signs of a break-in, requesting backup and medical assistance." While Peterson secured the first suspect, Max continued his mission, leading Dawson toward the kitchen, where they found a second man unconscious on the floor, a deep bite wound on his forearm still seeping blood. "We've got another one back here," Dawson called out, checking for weapons before kneeling to assess the man's condition. "He's breathing but lost a lot of blood." As the officers secured the scene, Deborah Jenkins knelt beside Max, carefully examining his injury. The cut across his muzzle looked painful but not life-threatening. It was the only wound she could find on him. The rest of the blood appeared to belong to the intruders. "Good boy," she whispered, her earlier fear replaced by understanding. "You were protecting your home." Outside, the crowd had grown as word spread through the neighborhood. Martha Wilson's certainty had begun to waver as Officer Dawson emerged to radio for an ambulance and additional units. 2 suspects in custody, he reported. Appears to be a home invasion interrupted by the resident's dog. Both suspects have bite wounds consistent with a canine takedown. A home invasion? Frank Wilson asked, adjusting his glasses. You mean the dog was defending the house? Looks that way, Dawson confirmed. Professional job, too. They had tools, gloves, the works, not their first rodeo. The narrative began to shift as neighbors processed this new information. The dangerous German Shepherd had not attacked innocent passers-by, but had defended his home against intruders. I tried to tell you all, Deborah said, emerging from the house with Max now calmly at her side, though still alert. She had found one of Caroline's clean kitchen towels and had gently wiped some of the blood from his face. Max was a police dog. He was doing what he was trained to do. Martha Wilson's expression tightened. Well, how were we supposed to know with that face? He always looks like he's about to attack someone. That face, came a new voice, deep and authoritative, is the result of saving my life. Lieutenant James Cooper pushed through the gathered neighbors, still in his sheriff's department uniform, his face tight with concern. The dispatcher had contacted him as soon as the address was identified. Max, he called, dropping to one knee. The transformation in the German Shepherd was immediate and complete. The vigilant guardian disappeared, replaced by an overjoyed dog who bounded to his former handler, pressing his entire body against Cooper's chest in a display of unbridled affection. Easy, boy, Cooper murmured, carefully examining the cut on Max's muzzle while the shepherd attempted to lick his face. You did good. You did so good. Officer Peterson approached, holstering his weapon. Sir, we've got 2 suspects in custody. Looks like they targeted the house specifically. Knowing it would be empty, they weren't expecting to find Max here. Their mistake, Cooper said grimly, standing with one hand resting protectively on Max's head. He turned to address the gathered neighbors, his expression both proud and pained. 3 years ago, Max took a knife to the face that was meant for my throat. The blade severed the nerves on the right side of his muzzle, which is why he looks the way he does. The damage is permanent. His gaze found Martha Wilson, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. When he tries to be friendly, when he smiles like dogs do, it looks like he's snarling because those muscles don't work properly anymore. But there's nothing wrong with his brain, his training, or his heart. The assembled crowd shifted uncomfortably as the weight of their misjudgment settled over them. The monster they'd feared had been a hero all along, twice over. As paramedics arrived to treat the injured burglars and crime scene technicians began processing the house, Max remained close to Cooper's side, his mission complete. He had guarded the house as instructed. He had protected what was precious, and in doing so, he had begun to change the narrative that had defined him since his injury. But the story of Max, the disfigured German Shepherd of Oak Ridge Lane, was far from over. The next 48 hours unfolded in a whirlwind of police reports, veterinary visits, and neighborhood gossip. Caroline had returned from her conference to find her home transformed into both a crime scene and the center of community attention. The story of Max's heroism had spread through Oak Ridge with the speed only small neighborhood networks can achieve, with each retelling growing slightly more dramatic. They're saying he took down 3 armed men. Frank Wilson reported to his wife as they sorted through their mail 2 days after the incident. Marge at the corner market heard it from her nephew, who works dispatch. Martha sniffed, sorting bills into her meticulous filing system. It was 2 men, and I doubt they were armed. People always exaggerate these things. Yet even Martha couldn't entirely dismiss the seed of doubt that had been planted regarding her campaign against Max. She'd spent months gathering signatures, hosting informal meetings on her patio where she served lemonade and concern in equal measure. "It's only a matter of time before that dog hurts someone," she'd insisted. "A dangerous animal with a history of aggression doesn't belong in a family neighborhood." Now those same neighbors were questioning her narrative, wondering if perhaps they'd been too quick to judge the shepherd by his appearance. At the Anderson Cooper household, Caroline sat cross-legged on the living room floor beside Max, gently applying antibiotic ointment to the cut across his muzzle. The veterinarian had assured her it wouldn't need stitches, though it might leave yet another scar on his already damaged face. "You were so brave," she murmured, her voice catching. "But next time, maybe just hide under the bed until the bad guys leave." "Okay." Max pressed his good side against her knee, his amber eyes watching her with an intelligence that sometimes took her breath away. In moments like these, she could almost convince herself he understood every word. Lieutenant Cooper entered from the kitchen, carrying 3 mugs of coffee on a tray. He'd taken a rare day off to help Caroline clean up the aftermath of the break-in and to be present for the various officials who needed statements. The burglars, Troy Simmons and Keith Dawkins, had both been treated for their injuries and now sat in county jail awaiting arraignment. They weren't talking much, but what they had revealed suggested a larger operation targeting homes in several communities. "The detective thinks they've hit at least 12 houses in the last month," Cooper explained, settling into the armchair across from where Officer Peterson sat on the couch. The young officer had stopped by, ostensibly to follow up on their report, but Caroline suspected he was equally motivated by curiosity about Max. "They were watching the house?" Caroline asked, accepting a mug from her father. Peterson nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Seems they'd been monitoring your routines. They knew you were at the conference and thought your dad would be working all day. They didn't count on Max," Cooper added, his weathered face creasing with a grim smile. He reached down to scratch behind the shepherd's ears, and Max leaned into the touch, eyes half closing in contentment. "The thing is," Peterson continued, "we're finding connections between this crew and a string of home invasions targeting elderly residents. Some of those cases turned violent when the homeowners unexpectedly returned." Cooper's expression darkened. "Targeting the vulnerable. The DA is pushing for maximum charges given the pattern," Peterson confirmed. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, could have been next on their list." Caroline shuddered at the thought of gentle Mrs. Jenkins confronting men like those who had invaded her home. The elderly widow lived alone with only her roses and her memories for company. "Has the department reconsidered its position on Max?" she asked, changing the subject. The question hung in the air between them. Cooper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Max is retired," he said flatly. "The decision was made by people above my pay grade." Peterson looked down at his coffee mug, clearly sensing he'd wandered into uncomfortable territory. "For what it's worth," he offered. "The guys at the station are pretty impressed. Not every retired K-9 maintains their training like that." Max, as if sensing he was the topic of conversation, sat up straighter. His ears perked forward attentively. "He shouldn't have had to retire in the first place," Cooper said, an edge creeping into his voice. 8 years on the force, commendations for bravery, successful apprehensions that put dangerous criminals behind bars, and they tossed him aside because of how he looks. Caroline recognized the familiar signs of her father's barely contained anger, the tightness around his eyes, the controlled precision of his movements as he set down his mug. She'd seen it frequently in the months following Max's forced retirement, when the shepherd had lived with Cooper in a strange limbo, no longer a working dog but struggling to adapt to pet life. "Dad," she said softly, "Max is happy here." Cooper exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I know, sweetie. You've been good for him." He managed a small smile. "Better than I was, trying to keep him in an apartment while working double shifts." The conversation shifted to practicalities repairs needed for the damaged doorframe, the timeline for the case against the burglars, the process for filing an insurance claim. Throughout it all, Max remained alert beside Caroline, occasionally glancing toward the windows and doors as if still on duty. After Peterson left, promising to keep them updated on the case, Caroline found herself standing at the living room window, looking out at the quiet street where neighbors were now going about their business with studied casualness. "They're all talking about it," she observed. "About Max." Cooper joined her at the window, hands in his pockets. "Let them talk. Maybe they'll finally see past the scars." "Martha Wilson came by this morning while you were at the hardware store," Caroline said. "She said she was checking to make sure we were okay, but I think she was really here to see Max. And," he tried to greet her the way he always does, "you know, with his version of a smile." Caroline's voice softened with affection. She still flinched, but she didn't back away. "Progress, I guess." Cooper squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "People fear what they don't understand, and they judge what doesn't fit their idea of normal. You never did," Caroline pointed out, "even after the attack. When the doctors said he might never be the same, you fought for him." A shadow crossed Cooper's face, and Caroline immediately regretted her words. The attack that had disfigured Max remained a source of deep guilt for her father, though everyone, including the Department Review Board, had concluded there was nothing he could have done differently. "I owed him that much," Cooper said quietly. The memory surged unbidden, as vivid as the day it had happened 3 years ago. The raid on the suspected meth house. The unexpected suspect emerging from a hidden room. The flash of a knife aimed at Cooper's throat. And Max Loyal. Brave Max launching himself between his handler and certain death, taking the blade across his face in a spray of blood that still haunted Cooper's dreams. Even injured, the shepherd had maintained his grip on the attacker until backup arrived. Cooper had held Max's bleeding head in his lap during the frantic drive to the emergency veterinary hospital, whispering promises that everything would be okay, that they would still be partners, that nothing would change. Promises he hadn't been able to keep. The surgeries had saved Max's life but couldn't repair the severed nerves. The right side of his face drooped noticeably, his lip permanently pulled back to reveal teeth in what looked like a threatening snarl. Rehabilitation had been grueling Max, initially confused by his body's refusal to respond as it once had. Cooper patiently working with him day after day. When Max was finally cleared to return to limited duty, Cooper had been certain they'd resume their partnership. Instead, he'd been called into Chief Harris's office and informed that Max was being retired. "The public face of our K-9 unit can't frighten the public," Harris had explained, genuinely regretful but unmovable. "Kids run away from him. Jim, witnesses won't approach. It's affecting his ability to do the job. He took that knife for me," Cooper had argued, his voice dangerously quiet. "And the department will ensure he has the best retirement possible." Harris had assured him. A hero's pension, medical care for life, but his active service days are over. Cooper had fought the decision through every available channel. But ultimately, Max's fate was sealed by the very visible reminder of his sacrifice. A sacrifice that had saved Cooper's life at the cost of the shepherd's career. Now, watching Max methodically patrol the perimeter of Caroline's living room, checking each window and door as he'd been trained to do, Cooper felt the familiar mix of pride and guilt wash over him. "He deserved better," he said finally. Carolyn looped her arm through her father's. "Then let's make sure he gets it now." The following week brought a community meeting at the Oak Ridge Lane Homeowners Association, ostensibly to discuss the recent break-ins and neighborhood security measures. In reality, everyone knew the gathering would address the elephant, or rather, the German shepherd in the room. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building beside the neighborhood pool that typically hosted holiday parties and monthly book clubs. Tonight, nearly every household was represented, filling the folding chairs that had been arranged in rows facing a small podium. Martha Wilson arrived early, as was her custom, clipboard in hand and cardigan perfectly coordinated with her slacks. As the HOA vice president, she took her position of authority seriously, arranging water pitchers and checking the microphone with officious energy. "There's a decent turnout," her husband Frank observed, helping to set out the last of the chairs. "Of course there is," Martha replied. "People are worried. 2 home invasions in broad daylight. Who knows where these criminals might strike next?" "I thought we were discussing the dog situation," Frank said mildly. Martha's lips thinned. "Security concerns include dangerous animals." "Frank..." The room gradually filled with neighbors. Deborah Jenkins arrived with her friend Elaine from 2 streets over, both women nodding politely to Martha before choosing seats near the middle of the room. The atmosphere held the charged anticipation of potential conflict, the community divided between those who supported the petition to remove Max from the neighborhood and those who now viewed him as a local hero. At precisely 7 o'clock, HOA President Gerald Thompson called the meeting to order. A retired accountant with a penchant for procedure, Gerald moved methodically through the agenda items, updates on pool maintenance, a reminder about upcoming tree trimming along the main boulevard, announcements about the summer block party. "And now," he said finally, adjusting his glasses, "we'll discuss the recent security incidents and related concerns. Martha Wilson has been gathering input from residents regarding the German Shepherd at 42 Oak Ridge Lane, and Lieutenant Cooper and his daughter have asked to address these concerns directly." A murmur rippled through the assembled neighbors as Caroline and Lieutenant Cooper rose from their seats in the back row. They moved to the front of the room. Cooper, in his civilian clothes but still carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Caroline, in simple jeans and a blue blouse, looked younger than her 22 years, but held herself with composed dignity. "First," Gerald continued, "I'd like to recognize the dog's role in apprehending the burglars who broke into the Anderson Cooper residence last week. The police report indicates that the animal acted in defense of the property. A smattering of applause broke out, quickly silenced by Martha's pointed look. However, Gerald added, we must also address the ongoing concerns about safety. Martha, would you like to present your petition? Martha rose, clipboard clutched to her chest. Thank you. Gerald, as many of you know, I've been collecting signatures regarding the German Shepherd known as Max. While recent events have certainly been dramatic, they don't change the fundamental issue. This animal has a facial disfigurement that makes him appear aggressive at all times, which is frightening to residents, particularly children and the elderly. She turned to face Caroline and Cooper directly. No one is questioning the dog's past service or the unfortunate circumstances of his injury, but the fact remains that his appearance is terrifying, and there have been multiple reports of residents feeling threatened when he appears to snarl at them. He's not snarling, Caroline interjected, her calm voice belying the flush rising in her cheeks. That's just how his face looks now because of nerve damage. Intention doesn't matter when perception causes fear, Martha countered. The HOA bylaws clearly state that residents may not harbor animals that create a nuisance or threat to the neighborhood. 43 residents have signed this petition asking that the dog be relocated to a more suitable environment, perhaps a specialized facility for retired service animals. The room erupted in overlapping voices, some agreeing with Martha, others objecting. Gerald tapped his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. Lieutenant Cooper, would you like to respond? He asked. Cooper stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Max served this community and this country for 8 years as a police K-9. During that time, he located missing children, found evidence that put murderers behind bars, and detected explosives that could have killed dozens. 3 years ago, he took a knife that was meant for me. His voice remained steady, but those who knew him well could detect the undercurrent of emotion. The injury left him with permanent nerve damage that affects how his facial muscles work. When he's trying to be friendly, when he's wagging his tail and eager to greet someone, the right side of his face doesn't respond properly. What looks like aggression is actually the opposite. Cooper's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of neighbors he'd known for years. Max has never, not once, shown unprovoked aggression toward any person. He is extensively trained, still remembers all his commands, and as we saw last week, retains his ability to assess and neutralize threats. That's exactly what concerns us, Martha interrupted. Having an animal trained to attack living in a residential neighborhood. Police K-9s are not trained to attack, Cooper corrected, an edge entering his voice. They're trained to apprehend and to use exactly the level of force necessary. Max could have killed those intruders if he wanted to. Instead, he disabled them with minimal injuries until help arrived. Deborah Jenkins raised her hand, and Gerald nodded for her to speak. I've known Max since he came to live with Caroline, she said, her soft voice nevertheless carrying clearly through the room. I check on him sometimes when Caroline's working late. He's always been nothing but gentle with me. Even when I accidentally step on his tail or make sudden movements that might startle another dog. She turned to face Martha directly. I understand being afraid of how he looks. The first time I saw him after his injury, I was startled too. But we can't judge a book by its cover or a dog by its scars, especially when those scars came from protecting one of our own. More neighbors began sharing experiences, some supporting Deborah's view, others recounting uncomfortable encounters with Max. The discussion grew heated at times, revealing a community deeply divided over the issue. Finally, Caroline stepped to the microphone, her expression resolute. "I'd like to address the concerns directly," she said. "As a veterinary student, I understand the fear response and how important it is for people to feel safe in their neighborhood. I'm not dismissing those feelings." She took a deep breath. "What I'm asking for is an opportunity to change the narrative. Max isn't dangerous, he's damaged, and he deserves a chance to show who he really is. Beyond the scars." "What exactly are you proposing?" Gerald asked. "A compromise," Carolyn replied. "Give us 3 months. During that time, I'll work with Max on specific community integration training. We'll host controlled meet and greets so people can interact with him in a safe environment. We'll create educational materials about his injury and how to interpret his actual body language versus his facial appearance." She looked directly at Martha. "If at the end of 3 months, the community still feels he's a threat, we'll find another living arrangement. But I'm asking you to give him the chance he's earned through his service." The room fell silent as neighbors considered her proposal. Gerald looked to Martha, whose clipboard now rested in her lap, her expression unreadable. "I think that's a reasonable request," Frank Wilson said suddenly, surprising his wife and everyone else in the room. "The dog saved our neighborhood from criminals who might have targeted any of us next. Seems like the least we can do is give him a fair chance." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Even some who had signed Martha's petition seemed to be reconsidering their position. Martha's lips pressed into a thin line as she surveyed the shifting sentiment. She'd built her reputation in Oak Ridge Lane on protecting property values and neighborhood standards. Being on the wrong side of public opinion wasn't a familiar position. 3 months, she said finally, her tone making it clear this was a significant concession. "With documented progress and strict supervision, any incident, no matter how minor, and we revisit the issue immediately." Caroline nodded, relief washing over her features. "Thank you. You won't regret it." As the meeting adjourned and neighbors gathered in small clusters to continue the discussion, Cooper placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "That was well done," he said quietly. "Your mother would have been proud." Carolyn leaned against him briefly. "I just hope we can change their minds." "Max deserves to live somewhere he's not feared." Cooper watched as Deborah Jenkins approached them, her kind face creased with a warm smile. "I'd like to volunteer to help with your integration program," she offered. "Perhaps we could start with a small gathering at my house. I make a wonderful lemon cake that might sweeten the deal." As they discussed possibilities, neither noticed Martha Wilson watching them from across the room, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. Beside her, Frank adjusted his glasses. "You know," he said conversationally, "if that dog hadn't been there, those burglars might have hit Deborah's house next. Or ours." Martha didn't respond immediately, her gaze still fixed on Caroline and Cooper. "It doesn't change the fact that he looks dangerous," she said finally, but her usual conviction was noticeably absent. "Maybe," Frank agreed mildly, "but then again, appearances can be deceiving. Remember how terrified you were of my mother when you first met her? All stern looks and sharp comments. Took you years to realize it was just her way." Martha shot him an irritated glance. "That's hardly the same thing." "Isn't it?" Frank countered. "You judged her by her exterior. Turned out there was a lot more beneath the surface." He patted his wife's hand and wandered off to refill his coffee cup. leaving Martha alone with thoughts she wasn't entirely comfortable, confronting chief among them the unsettling realization that perhaps, just perhaps, she had been wrong about the shepherd with the damaged face. Summer settled over Oak Ridge Lane with a vengeance, bringing relentless heat that shimmered above the asphalt and sent residents retreating into air-conditioned sanctuaries. By mid-July, a month after the break-in at Caroline's house, the neighborhood had established a new normal. Max's integration program had begun with cautious success, small, controlled meet and greets in Deborah Jenkins' backyard. Educational pamphlets Caroline had created explaining canine body language, and scheduled walks during quiet hours when Max could encounter neighbors gradually. Progress was slow, but measurable. Children no longer crossed to the opposite sidewalk when they spotted the German shepherd, though their parents often still hovered protectively nearby. Several elderly residents who had initially signed Martha's petition had met Max in controlled settings and revised their opinions. Even Martha herself had grudgingly acknowledged that in controlled environments, the shepherd behaved impeccably. But that's not the issue, she maintained during her weekly coffee with Deborah. Of course he's well behaved when Caroline's right there managing everything. The concern is what happens in an unexpected situation. What no one in Oak Ridge Lane realized was how soon that concern would be tested. The day began like any other July Saturday scorching by mid-morning, with the neighborhood collectively moving in slow motion. Martha Wilson stood in her kitchen, preparing a pitcher of sun tea to steep on her back porch. Through the window, she could see her husband Frank napping in his recliner, the television tuned to a baseball game he'd lost interest in 20 minutes into the first inning. At 65, Martha prided herself on maintaining an immaculate home and an active lifestyle despite the heat. Today's agenda included preparing for the church bake sale committee meeting she would host that evening. 8 women from the First Presbyterian Altar Guild would gather in her dining room to plan their annual fundraiser while enjoying Martha's renowned lemon squares and iced tea. She had just set the glass pitcher on the back porch when she noticed the scent faint at first, then increasingly acrid. Smoke. She frowned, scanning her backyard for the source. Nothing seemed amiss in the immediate vicinity, but when she stepped further onto the porch, she could see a thin tendril of dark smoke rising from somewhere near the back of her house. "Frank?" she called, returning inside. "Do you smell that?" Her husband stirred slightly but didn't wake. Martha moved quickly to the garage door, pulling it open to investigate. The moment the door swung wide, thick black smoke billowed into the kitchen. Somewhere in the attached garage, a fire had taken hold. "Frank!" she screamed, the pitcher slipping from her hands and shattering on the tile floor. "Wake up!" She rushed to the living room, shaking her husband's shoulder roughly. Frank startled awake, blinking in confusion. "There's a fire in the garage," Martha explained urgently, pulling him to his feet. "We need to get out now." Frank moved with the disoriented sluggishness of someone abruptly woken from a deep sleep. "What? How?" "I don't know how it started," Martha snapped, fear making her voice sharp. "But it's spreading fast. Come on." They made it to the front door just as the smoke alarm finally began its piercing wail. Outside, the heat hit them like a physical wall after the air-conditioned interior. Martha looked back at her house, their home of 37 years, and saw smoke now seeping from under the eaves near the garage. "I'll call 911, Frank said, reaching for his phone only to realize he'd left it charging beside his recliner. "Damn it! Use mine." Martha started, then froze. Her phone was in her purse, hanging from a hook in the kitchen, now separated from them by an increasingly dangerous wall of smoke. A neighbor from across the street had noticed their emergence and the smoke, and was already on his phone, presumably calling emergency services. Others began to emerge from nearby houses, drawn by the commotion. "Is everyone out?" someone called. "Yes, it's just us," Frank confirmed, putting an arm around Martha's trembling shoulders. The smoke was thickening, changing from gray to an ominous black that suggested the fire had found new fuel. The distant wail of sirens offered the promise of professional help. But Martha knew that their house filled with decades of memories, photographs, heirlooms from her grandmother might suffer catastrophic damage before firefighters could arrive. "My mother's china," she whispered, watching helplessly as smoke began to billow from a kitchen window. "All our photographs, and 4 houses down." Carolyn was in her backyard with Max, practicing the specialized training techniques they'd been working on for his community integration program. The shepherd was responding beautifully to the advanced commands, his intelligence and eagerness to please shining through despite the heat. "Good boy," Caroline praised, offering a small treat from her pocket. "That's perfect." Max's ears suddenly pricked forward, his body tensing in alertness. A moment later, Caroline heard it too, the distant wail of sirens, followed by shouting from somewhere down the street. Max was already moving to the gate, his posture shifting from relaxed to vigilant in an instant. "What is it? Boy?" Carolyn asked, following his gaze. Through the slats in the fence, she could see neighbors gathering, pointing toward something beyond her line of sight. The acrid scent of smoke reached her a moment later. She quickly attached Max's leash and moved to the front yard, where the commotion became clear. 4 houses down. The Wilson residence was engulfed in thick smoke, with flames now visible through the garage windows. Martha and Frank stood on the lawn, Martha's face a mask of distress as she watched her home burning. Neighbors had gathered at a safe distance, some on phones, others speaking in urgent tones about whether the fire might spread to adjacent properties. The sound of sirens grew louder, but the fire trucks had not yet arrived. Caroline's training as a veterinary student included emergency response, and she moved toward the scene automatically, Max at her side. The shepherd's demeanor had shifted fully into working mode alert, focused, awaiting commands. As they approached, Caroline heard fragments of conversation. "Started in the garage, some kind of electrical, got out just in time. Fire department's coming from the station across town." She reached the edge of the gathering neighbors just as Martha Wilson suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The china cabinet!" she cried, turning to her husband. "I left the dining room windows open for the breeze. The smoke will ruin everything." "Martha, it's just things," Frank said gently, though his own face showed the pain of watching their home burn. "We got out. That's what matters." "But the photographs," Martha insisted, her voice cracking. "Our wedding album, all the pictures of Michael growing up." Their son, now living in Seattle with his own family, existed in those cherished albums, baby photos, graduation, his wedding day. Martha took a step toward the house, a movement born of desperate impulse rather than rational thought. Frank caught her arm, pulling her back. "You can't go in there," he said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "But they're irreplaceable," Martha whispered, tears streaking down her face. Caroline had reached them by now, taking in the situation quickly. "Mrs. Wilson, the fire department will be here soon," she said. "They're trained for this." Martha barely seemed to register Caroline's presence, her gaze fixed on her home where the smoke had thickened ominously. But then her eyes dropped to Max, standing alert at Caroline's side, and widened with a different kind of fear. "Keep that dog away," she said automatically, stepping back. Even in crisis, the ingrained reaction remained. Caroline started to respond, but was interrupted by a sharp crack from the direction of the house, the sound of something structural giving way. All eyes turned to see part of the garage roof collapse inward, sending a plume of sparks into the air. The fire had fully taken hold now, spreading beyond the garage into the adjacent kitchen. "My God," Frank breathed. "It's going so fast." The wail of sirens grew louder, but it was clear the fire trucks were still minutes away. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of the fire department's coverage area, with the nearest station across town. Martha swayed slightly, her face ashen as she watched flames begin to lick at the kitchen windows. "All our memories," she whispered. "Everything we've built." Something changed in Max's demeanor. The shepherd's attention had been divided between the commotion, the gathering neighbors, and the fire itself. But at the sound of genuine distress in Martha's voice, his focus sharpened. He looked from Martha to the burning house, then up at Caroline, a low whine building in his throat. Caroline recognized the sound. It was the same vocalization Max had made years ago when he'd detected someone in danger during search and rescue training, a specific alert that had been part of his police K-9 conditioning. "Max, stay," she commanded firmly, tightening her grip on his leash. The last thing they needed was for the shepherd to bolt toward the danger. But Max's training went deeper than Caroline realized. Years of police work had conditioned responses in him that transcended basic obedience. His entire body tensed, gaze locked on the house, nostrils flaring as he processed information human senses couldn't detect. Before anyone could react, Max lunged forward with unexpected strength, the leash slipping through Caroline's fingers. The shepherd bolted directly toward the Wilson house, his powerful body moving with purposeful speed. "Max!" Caroline screamed, starting after him. "Come back!" Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God! What is he doing?" The German shepherd reached the front door, which Frank had left partially open in their hasty exit. Without hesitation, Max disappeared into the smoke-filled house. "No!" Caroline cried, running toward the building only to be intercepted by Frank, who caught her arms. "You can't go in there," he said urgently. "The roof could collapse any minute." "But Max—" Caroline's voice broke, tears springing to her eyes. "He's gone in after something," Frank said, his own expression a mix of concern and confusion. "Or someone, does he think there's still a person inside?" "There isn't," Martha said shakily. "It's just us. We're both out." They stood in helpless silence, watching the doorway where Max had disappeared. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The crackle of flames and distant sirens the only sounds. Caroline felt her heart pounding painfully in her chest, each beat a desperate prayer for Max's return. Then, like a phantom materializing from the darkness, a shape appeared in the doorway. Max emerged from the smoke, his fur gray with ash, Something clutched carefully in his mouth. He moved with deliberate precision down the front steps, crossed the yard, and approached Martha Wilson. The German shepherd sat directly in front of her, his damaged face even more alarming, covered in soot, and gently released his burden at her feet, a leather-bound album, its corners singed but the contents intact. Martha's wedding album. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Max turned and bolted back toward the house. "Max, no!" Caroline screamed, breaking free from Frank's loosened grip. But the shepherd had already disappeared back into the smoke. The next 3 minutes passed in excruciating slow motion. Max emerged twice more, first with a small wooden box containing Martha's mother's jewelry, then with a framed photograph of the Wilsons with their son and grandchildren. Each time, he delivered his treasure directly to Martha before returning to the Inferno. After the third trip, even Max seemed to recognize the increasing danger. The fire had spread to the living room, and the smoke had thickened to an impenetrable black cloud. He stood at the doorway, visibly hesitating for the first time, his sides heaving with exertion. "Please," Caroline whispered, her voice breaking. "Please come back." As if hearing her plea, Max turned away from the door and trotted back across the lawn. His normally lustrous coat was gray with ash, his eyes red from the smoke, but his posture remained dignified as he approached Martha Wilson one final time. The fire trucks arrived moments later, firefighters leaping into action with hoses and equipment, but for the small gathering on the lawn, time seemed suspended as Martha Wilson knelt slowly before the German shepherd who had just risked his life to save the irreplaceable pieces of her history. With trembling hands, she reached out, not to the undamaged side of his face as most did, but directly to the scarred, distorted right side that had frightened her for so long. Her fingers gently touched the damaged tissue, tracing the path of the knife that had created his fearsome appearance. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "Thank you for saving our memories." Max, exhausted and smoke-stained, did what came naturally to him. He attempted to smile, his damaged facial muscles pulling his lip back in what had always appeared to be a snarl. But this time, Martha Wilson didn't flinch away. This time, she saw beyond the scars to the hero beneath, as the firefighters battled to save what remained of the Wilson home. A different kind of transformation had already occurred, one that no amount of flames could undo. The aftermath of a fire carries its own peculiar silence, a hollow emptiness that echoes with what has been lost. As evening fell on Oak Ridge Lane, that silence enveloped the Wilson home, now a blackened shell of its former self. The firefighters had managed to contain the blaze before it spread to neighboring houses, but the Wilson residents had suffered catastrophic damage. The garage where the fire had started, later determined to be caused by faulty wiring in an old chest freezer, was completely destroyed. The kitchen and living room were gutted, and smoke damage pervaded every corner of the structure. Martha and Frank Wilson sat on folding chairs in Deborah Jenkins' living room, shell-shocked and weary. Neighbors had rallied immediately, bringing clothes, toiletries, and offers of spare bedrooms. Their son Michael had been notified and was already booking a flight from Seattle. Insurance adjusters would arrive tomorrow. Life would eventually resettle into some new pattern of normalcy. But for tonight, there was only the dazed recognition of how quickly everything could change. "At least we saved these," Frank said softly, his hand resting on the small pile of rescued treasures on Deborah's coffee table, the wedding album, the jewelry box, the framed family photograph. Singed around the edges but intact, these fragments of their history had been spared the destruction that claimed everything else. Martha nodded, her fingers tracing the leather binding of the album. We wouldn't have even these if not for... Her voice faltered, unable to complete the thought that seemed too contrary to everything she had believed for the past 3 years. Across town at the South Valley Emergency Veterinary Hospital, Caroline paced the small waiting room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if physically holding her emotions in check. Lieutenant Cooper sat nearby, his expression grim as he watched his daughter wear a path in the faded carpet. "They've been in there over an hour," Carolyn said, glancing at the clock for the 100th time. "Why won't they tell us anything?" Cooper stood, placing a steadying hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Because they're doing their job, taking care of Max. Dr. Brennan is the best veterinary pulmonologist in the county. If anyone can help him, she can." The words offered little comfort. Both of them knew the dangers smoke inhalation posed, especially to canines whose respiratory systems were particularly vulnerable. Max had made multiple trips into the burning house, breathing in toxic fumes with each rescue mission. By the time they'd rushed him to the emergency clinic, his breathing had become labored, his powerful body uncharacteristically limp in Caroline's arms. "He just charged in without hesitation," Caroline whispered, her voice breaking. "Right into the fire, like he didn't even think about the danger." "He didn't," Cooper replied simply. "That's who he is, who he's always been." The memory surfaced unbidden Max as a young K-9 recruit, racing through training exercises with joyful dedication, never hesitating when facing simulated threats. The same unhesitating courage that had sent him lunging between Cooper and a knife-wielding suspect 3 years ago had driven him into a burning building today. The door to the treatment area swung open, and Dr. Emma Brennan emerged, her face weary beneath a surgical cap. Caroline froze, searching the veterinarian's expression for clues before she even spoke. "He's stabilized," Dr. Brennan began, and Caroline felt her knees weaken with relief. Cooper's arm went around her shoulders, supporting her as the doctor continued. "But I won't sugarcoat this. The smoke inhalation was significant. His airways are severely irritated, and we're monitoring for pulmonary edema." "But he'll recover?" Cooper asked, his voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. Dr. Brennan's hesitation spoke volumes. "The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. We've got him on oxygen therapy and medication to reduce the inflammation, but with smoke inhalation, complications can develop rapidly. There's also the risk of secondary pneumonia." Carolyn pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Can we see him?" "Briefly," the veterinarian conceded. "He's sedated and on oxygen, so he won't be responsive. But I think it would be good for him to sense you're here." They followed Dr. Brennan through the swinging doors into the treatment area, past staff in scrubs monitoring other animal patients, to a quiet corner where a large oxygen kennel housed a still form. Max lay on his side, an IV line attached to his foreleg, his usually alert body now unnaturally motionless, except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Monitoring equipment beeped softly, tracking his vital signs. Caroline pressed her hand against the clear plastic of the oxygen chamber, tears streaming down her face. "Max," she whispered. "We're here, boy. You're going to be okay." The shepherd's eyes remained closed. His breathing labored despite the supplemental oxygen. The damage to his face seemed even more pronounced in this vulnerable state. The scarred tissue a stark reminder of the price he had paid for his loyalty not once, but twice now. Cooper stood beside his daughter, his own hand resting on the chamber near Max's head. In that moment, he looked older than his 48 years. The lines in his face deepened by worry and a father's helplessness in the face of his child's pain. "I should have held on to his leash tighter," Caroline said, her voice thick with guilt. "I should have known he would try to help." "This isn't your fault," Cooper assured her. "Max made a choice, the same choice he's always made. To protect. To serve." Dr. Brennan approached quietly. "We need to let him rest now. The best thing you can do is go home and get some sleep yourselves. We'll call immediately if there's any change." Caroline shook her head. "I'm not leaving him." "Sweetheart," Cooper began gently. "No, Dad. I won't leave him alone here. He'd never leave me." Dr. Brennan's expression softened. "There's a small break room down the hall with a couch. It's not comfortable, but you're welcome to stay there. We'll come get you if there's any change in his condition." As they settled in for the long night ahead, Cooper's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see Martha Wilson's name. "Martha's asking about Max," he told Caroline, his own surprise evident. "She wants to know how he's doing." Caroline looked up from where she sat on the edge of the worn couch. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that it's serious, but he's fighting." The phone buzzed again almost immediately. Cooper read the message, his eyebrows rising slightly. "She and Frank want to come to the hospital tomorrow morning. To see Max." Caroline's exhausted face registered momentary confusion. "Martha Wilson. The same Martha who's been trying to get Max removed from the neighborhood for months?" Cooper nodded, equally puzzled by this turn of events. Apparently, saving irreplaceable family heirlooms from a burning building changes perspectives. The night passed in fitful intervals of uncomfortable dozing and anxious wakefulness. Each time a staff member entered the break room, both Cooper and Caroline jolted to full alertness, fearing the worst. But the updates remained cautiously stable, no improvement, but no decline either. Max was fighting. Dawn was breaking over the hills east of town when Dr. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her face grave. Caroline was on her feet instantly, heart pounding. "His oxygen levels have dropped," the veterinarian said without preamble. "And his latest chest X-ray shows fluid beginning to accumulate in his lungs. We need to move him to a more aggressive treatment protocol." "Whatever it takes," Cooper said firmly. "Cost isn't an issue." Dr. Brennan nodded. "We're prepping him now. I just wanted to prepare you. He's going to look worse before he looks better. We're placing an endotracheal tube to better deliver oxygen and medication directly to his lungs." Caroline swayed slightly, and Cooper guided her back to the couch. "He's going to be intubated?" she asked, her veterinary training helping her understand the gravity of the situation. "It's our best option right now," Dr. Brennan confirmed. "His body needs help while it heals from the damage." 2 hours later, Max had been moved to intensive care, a breathing tube now assisting his labored respiration. Caroline stood at the window of the ICU, watching the medical team work with quiet efficiency around the shepherd's still form. The juxtaposition was jarring. The powerful K-9 who had fearlessly charged into danger, now utterly dependent on machines and human intervention to survive. "He looks so small," she whispered. Though Max's 90-pound frame took up most of the treatment table, Cooper stood beside her, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "He's a fighter, Caroline. Always has been. What if that's not enough this time?" The question hung in the air between them, giving voice to the fear neither wanted to acknowledge. Before Cooper could respond, a commotion in the waiting area drew their attention. Through the glass doors, they could see Martha and Frank Wilson speaking with the receptionist, Martha gesturing emphatically while clutching what appeared to be a large gift basket. "I can't believe they actually came," Caroline murmured, wiping hastily at her tears. Cooper squeezed her shoulder. "Why don't you go talk to them? I'll stay here with Max." Caroline hesitated, reluctant to leave Max's side even for a moment. "Dad, what if he—" "I'll come get you immediately if anything changes," Cooper promised. "But right now, there's nothing we can do except wait. And it might do you good to step away, just for a few minutes." With a final glance at Max's unconscious form, Caroline nodded and made her way to the waiting area. Martha Wilson looked up as she approached, her usually immaculate appearance replaced by someone who had clearly dressed in borrowed clothes and hadn't slept. Frank stood beside her, his kind face lined with concern. "How is he?" Martha asked immediately, dispensing with pleasantries. Caroline swallowed hard. "Not good. They've had to intubate him. The smoke damaged his lungs, and they're worried about pneumonia developing." Martha's face fell, her hand reaching unconsciously for her husband's. "I was afraid of that. All that smoke, and he went back in 3 times. Her voice wavered. "For our things, our memories." "We brought this," Frank said, indicating the large basket Martha still clutched. "It's not much, but we wanted to do something." Caroline accepted the gift numbly, glancing inside to see an assortment of high-end dog treats, toys, a plush dog bed, and several envelopes. "Thank you. That's very kind." "The envelopes," Martha explained, her usual briskness subdued. "One's a contribution toward his medical expenses. The other is, well, it's a retraction of my petition. I've already contacted everyone who signed it." Caroline stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You've withdrawn the petition?" Martha nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "How could I possibly continue after what he did? He saved the only irreplaceable things in our home, things that mattered only to us, that no one else would have thought to rescue." She reached into her borrowed purse and withdrew the singed wedding album, opening it carefully to a photograph of a much younger Martha and Frank on their wedding day. 43 years of memories in this book, and he knew somehow, he knew it mattered. The emotion Caroline had been struggling to contain finally broke free, tears streaming down her face. "He might not make it," she whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. Martha Wilson, who had spent months campaigning to have Max removed from Oak Ridge Lane, stepped forward and took Caroline's hands in her own. "Then we'll be there with you, dear. Whatever happens. And in that moment, surrounded by the sterile efficiency of the veterinary hospital, with Max fighting for his life just rooms away, Caroline recognized the bittersweet irony that it might take losing Max to finally prove what she had argued all along, that beneath his frightening appearance beat the heart of a true hero. Time moved differently in hospitals, human or veterinary. Hours stretched like taffy, punctuated by moments of terror when alarms sounded or medical staff rushed with urgent purpose. For 3 days, the South Valley Emergency Veterinary Hospital became the reluctant center of Caroline and Lieutenant Cooper's world as Max fought his most difficult battle yet. Word spread quickly through Oak Ridge Lane about the shepherd's condition. What began as concerned inquiries from a few neighbors soon transformed into something more significant. Deborah Jenkins organized a rotation of visitors bringing food and coffee to the waiting room. Frank Wilson coordinated transportation for elderly residents who wanted to show support but couldn't drive themselves. Children from the neighborhood made get-well cards with crayon drawings of a heroic dog saving treasures from flames. By the second day, the veterinary staff had to designate a special area for the flowers, cards, and gifts arriving for their canine patient. Dr. Brennan, initially surprised by the outpouring of community support, began providing regular updates to the growing circle of visitors. "We're seeing small improvements in his oxygen levels," she explained to the assembled group on the morning of the third day. "The medication is reducing the inflammation in his airways, and the chest x-rays show the fluid in his lungs beginning to clear." "Does that mean he'll recover?" Martha Wilson asked. She had become a fixture at the hospital, arriving early each morning with thermos containers of homemade soup and sandwiches for Caroline and Cooper. Dr. Brennan's expression remained cautiously optimistic. "He's not out of danger yet, but he's moving in the right direction. Max is demonstrating remarkable resilience, especially considering his age and the severity of the smoke inhalation." Caroline, exhausted from nights spent sleeping on the break-room couch, clung to each positive sign. When Max had first shown responsiveness to her voice, squeezing her hand lightly with his paw, she'd wept with relief. When they'd removed the breathing tube on the second evening, replacing it with a less invasive oxygen mask, she'd felt the first real hope that he might actually survive. Lieutenant Cooper divided his time between the hospital, his shifts at the sheriff's department, and helping with repairs at the Wilson residence. The insurance company had moved quickly, and contractors were already working to restore the damaged home. Cooper had volunteered his construction experience from his pre-law enforcement days, spending evenings hanging drywall and rebuilding cabinets alongside other neighbors who had formed an impromptu renovation crew. On the afternoon of the fourth day, as Caroline sat beside Max's kennel, reading aloud from a dog-eared paperback, a ritual she'd maintained throughout his hospitalization, Dr. Brennan entered with an unusual companion. Chief William Harris of the County Sheriff's Department stood awkwardly in the doorway, his uniform immaculate, his expression uncertain. "Chief Harris," Caroline said, rising in surprise. "Dad's not here right now. He's helping with the Wilson house repairs." "Actually," the chief said, clearing his throat, "I came to see Max. And you." Caroline gestured to the chair beside her, and the chief settled into it, his gaze moving to the German shepherd. Max was awake, still on supplemental oxygen, but alert, his amber eyes following the conversation with the intelligent awareness that had always set him apart. "How's he doing?" Chief Harris asked. "Better?" Caroline replied. They're talking about discharging him tomorrow if his oxygen levels continue to improve. He'll need ongoing treatment and lots of rest, but... She swallowed hard. He's going to make it. The chief nodded, genuine relief crossing his features. That's good news, very good news. He hesitated, then continued. I've been following the situation. Word gets around, especially when it involves one of our own. Former, Caroline corrected quietly. Former one of your own. Chief Harris had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yes, well, that's partly why I'm here. He leaned forward, addressing Max directly. You've made quite an impression, old friend. The entire department's been talking about what you did. Max's tail thumped weakly against the bedding, recognizing the uniform if not the specific person wearing it. The thing is, Harris continued, turning back to Caroline, I've been receiving calls, a lot of calls, from your neighbors, from community members, even from the mayor, all about Max. Caroline tensed slightly. Despite Martha's withdrawn petition, she knew there could still be legal complications regarding Max's presence in the neighborhood, especially after such a high-profile incident. I'm not here with problems, Harris said quickly, reading her expression. Quite the opposite. The department has been re-evaluating our policies regarding retired K-9 officers, particularly those retired due to injuries sustained in the line of duty. He shifted uncomfortably in the small chair. The truth is, Ms. Anderson, we didn't handle Max's situation well. When he was injured protecting your father, the department should have done more than simply pension him off. A K-9 officer with his record of service deserved better. Caroline remained silent, unwilling to make this easier for the man who had been instrumental in ending Max's career. The public response to Max's actions during the Wilson fire has created a unique opportunity, Harris continued. The department is establishing a new community outreach program focused on retired service animals. We'd like Max to be the face of that program once he's recovered. Of course. Caroline's eyebrows rose. You want to use Max for public relations? After forcing him into retirement because his appearance might frighten people? Harris winced. I deserve that. But this isn't just PR. We're creating a legitimate program to support retired service animals and educate the public about their ongoing value to the community. There would be a stipend, comprehensive veterinary care, and official recognition of Max's continued service. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is just a preliminary outline, but it details the proposed position a community liaison officer with a K-9 companion, educational visits, community outreach, school programs. Caroline accepted the document cautiously. And who would handle Max in this role? Ideally, someone with an existing bond and understanding of his capabilities. Someone like your father if he's interested in taking on a new assignment. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about rehabilitating Max's image. It was about restoring the partnership that had been severed 3 years ago. Why now? Caroline asked bluntly. What's changed? Harris sighed, his official demeanor slipping to reveal something more genuine. Several things. The public response to Max's actions at the Wilson fire, the community support we've witnessed here at the hospital, but mostly, he glanced at Max, who was watching him intently. Mostly, it's recognizing a mistake that needs correction. Your father was right 3 years ago when he argued that Max's capabilities hadn't changed, only his appearance. We made a decision based on optics rather than performance, and that was wrong." Caroline looked down at Max, gently stroking the undamaged side of his face. "This would have to be his choice," she said finally. "And Dad's. I won't speak for either of them." "Of course," Harris agreed quickly. "I'm meeting with Lieutenant Cooper tomorrow to discuss the details. I just wanted to—" He paused, then finished with unexpected sincerity. "I wanted to apologize to Max first. Professional courtesy." As if understanding the significance of the moment, Max lifted his head slightly, his intelligent eyes fixed on the chief. Then, slowly and deliberately, he extended his paw. Harris looked startled, then deeply moved. He reached out and shook the offered paw gently. "Thank you, Officer Max," he said quietly, "for your service, past and future." After the chief departed, Caroline sat in stunned silence, the proposal still in her hands. The possibilities it presented were simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Max returning to some form of service could give him back the purpose he'd lost with retirement. Working alongside her father would restore the partnership that had defined both their lives for so many years. But Max's recent brush with death had also highlighted his vulnerability. He wasn't a young dog anymore. The injury that had disfigured him had taken a toll beyond the visible scars, and now his lungs had sustained damage that might never fully heal. "What do you think, boy?" she asked softly, scratching behind his ears the way he loved, ready for a second act. Max's tail thumped against the bedding again, his eyes alert despite his weakened state. Even now, fighting to recover from injuries sustained while saving others, there was an undeniable eagerness in his gaze. This was a dog born to serve. The door to the treatment room opened again, and Martha Wilson entered hesitantly, carrying a small, insulated bag. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I brought some of that chicken soup Carolyn seemed to like yesterday." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That's very kind." Martha set the bag down and approached Max's bedside cautiously. Over the past 4 days, she had gradually overcome her instinctive fear of the shepherd's appearance, though she still moved with careful deliberation around him. "He looks better today," she observed. "More alert," Carolyn nodded. "The doctors are optimistic, and the chief of the sheriff's department was just here with an interesting proposal." She explained the community liaison position, watching Martha's expression shift from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "So he'd be working with children in schools," Martha clarified. "Among other things, yes. Educational programs about service animals, safety demonstrations, that sort of thing." Martha was silent for a moment, her gaze resting on Max. Then she reached into her purse and withdrew a carefully folded piece of paper. "I was going to wait until he was feeling better to share this, but perhaps now is the right time." She handed the paper to Caroline. "It's from the elementary school principal. The school board has unanimously approved having Max visit as a special guest once he's recovered. They want the children to learn about his service both as a police dog and as a hero in our community." Caroline unfolded the letter, reading the formal invitation with growing amazement. This was your doing." Martha's cheeks colored slightly. "I may have spoken with some members of the school board. Several of them attend my church." She straightened her borrowed cardigan, a gesture of her returning composure. "The children need to learn that appearances can be deceiving, that sometimes the most heroic hearts beat beneath the most frightening exteriors." Coming from Martha Wilson, who had spent months campaigning against Max based entirely on his appearance, the statement carried profound weight. "There's something else," Martha continued, drawing another envelope from her purse. "The community has been collecting donations for Max's medical care. I know Lieutenant Cooper insisted he would cover everything, but we felt we wanted to contribute." She handed over the envelope, which was thick with cash and checks. "There's nearly $7,000 there. Whatever isn't needed for his treatment. Perhaps it could go towards supplies for this new program, or perhaps a proper vest, identifying him as a working dog again." Caroline stared at the envelope, then back at Martha, momentarily speechless. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, dear." Martha's gaze shifted to Max, and with only slight hesitation, she reached out to touch the scarred side of his muzzle. "He's the one who spoke the loudest without saying a word at all." As Martha departed, promising to return that evening with dinner, Caroline sat beside Max, the proposal and donations and school invitation creating a physical weight in her lap that matched the emotional one in her chest. The tide had turned completely. The community that had once feared and rejected Max now rallied behind him, celebrating the very spirit that had never wavered despite years of misjudgment. "Looks like you've got a second chance, boy," she whispered, leaning down to press her forehead gently against his. "A chance to show everyone what Dad and I have always known." Max's response was a soft whine and a gentle lick to her hand, simple gestures that carried the weight of all the love, loyalty, and courage that had defined his life of service. The scars that had marked him as frightening to strangers now stood as testament to his willingness to sacrifice for others. And in that transformation of perception lay the greatest revelation of all, that sometimes true beauty revealed itself most powerfully through the marks left by suffering. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Oak Ridge Lane bustled with unusual activity. Residents emerged from their homes dressed in their Sunday best, converging on the recently renovated community park at the center of the neighborhood. A small stage had been erected near the playground, decorated with red, white, and blue bunting. Rows of folding chairs faced the podium, quickly filling with families, elderly couples, and excited children clutching small paper flags. The occasion, the official inauguration of the County Sheriff's Department's new Community Canine Ambassador Program, and more specifically, the formal recognition of its first ambassador. In the Anderson Cooper home, Lieutenant James Cooper adjusted his dress uniform in the hallway mirror, aligning his badges and commendations with meticulous precision. At 53, the silver at his temples had increased over the past few months. But there was a lightness to his bearing that had been absent for years. "Dad, we're going to be late," Caroline called from the living room, where she was attaching a specially designed harness to Max. The German shepherd sat patiently as she secured the straps, his posture alert and dignified. The custom-made vest bore the Sheriff's Department insignia and the words "Canine Ambassador" in bold lettering across both sides. "Can't rush perfection," Cooper replied. Emerging from the hallway, he paused, taking in the sight of his daughter and Max prepared for the ceremony. "Look at you two. Your mother would be so proud today." Caroline smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "She would be proud of all of us." She straightened, giving Max's harness a final check. "Ready. Ambassador Max." The shepherd's response was immediate, his posture shifting subtly into the working stance that had been ingrained through years of training. Even after 3 years of retirement and his recent health challenges, some instincts remained undiminished. The recovery had been slower than any of them had hoped. Max's damaged lungs required ongoing medication and occasional oxygen therapy during the first weeks after his discharge from the hospital. There had been setbacks, days when his breathing became labored again, nights when Caroline slept on the floor beside his bed, monitoring each breath. But gradually, with the resilience that had defined his entire life, Max had fought his way back to strength. Not the same strength as before, Doctor. Brennan had been clear that his lung capacity would likely never fully return to pre-injury levels. He tired more easily now, required more rest between activities, but what he lacked in physical stamina, he made up for with the wisdom and patience that came with his years of service. The walk to the park took longer than usual, as neighbors stopped to greet them along the way. Children who had once crossed the street to avoid Max now ran up eagerly, asking permission to pet the hero dog they'd heard so much about. Elderly residents who had previously signed Martha's petition now smiled and nodded respectfully as he passed. At the edge of the park, a familiar figure awaited them. Martha Wilson stood ramrod straight in a powder blue suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, a clipboard clutched in her hands. The Wilsons had moved back into their renovated home 6 weeks ago, the interior rebuilt and redesigned, but still containing the precious memories Max had rescued from the flames. "There you are," Martha said, checking her watch. "Right on time. The mayor has just arrived, and Chief Harris is reviewing his speech one last time." The transformation in Martha's attitude toward Max remained the most remarkable change of all. From leading the charge to remove him from the neighborhood to becoming his most vocal advocate, her journey mirrored the community's shift in perception. The woman who had once described Max as a dangerous animal now chaired the Civilian Oversight Committee for the new Canine Ambassador program, ensuring the initiative received proper funding and community support. "How's our guest of honor doing today?" she asked, bending slightly to address Max directly. She still approached him with careful movements, but the fear had been replaced by genuine respect. "He's ready," Cooper assured her. "Been practicing his dignified face all morning." Martha smiled, reaching out to touch Max's head briefly before leading them toward the stage. "There's quite a turnout. The elementary school brought 3 classes, and the retirement community sent a bus, even some reporters from the county paper." As they approached the gathering, a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Children pointed excitedly, and spontaneous applause broke out as people caught sight of Max in his official vest. The shepherd's ears perked forward at the sound, but he maintained his composed demeanor, walking steadily between Caroline and Cooper. Chief Harris met them at the steps to the stage, extending his hand to Cooper. "Lieutenant, Ms. Anderson, and Officer Max, thank you for being here today." The ceremony itself was both official and deeply personal. After the mayor's opening remarks and Chief Harris's explanation of the new program, Lieutenant Cooper was called forward to accept his new commission as director of the Community Canine Ambassador Program. The position had been created specifically to utilize his experience with canine training while accommodating Max's health limitations, no more high-stress tactical situations, but rather educational outreach, community building, and public safety awareness. When it came time for Max's formal recognition, the shepherd ascended the steps with deliberate dignity, taking his place center stage as Chief Harris read the commendation. For extraordinary courage in the face of danger, for selfless service to the community, and for demonstrating the highest qualities of loyalty and dedication, the County Sheriff's Department hereby recognizes K-9 Officer Max with the Medal of Valor. As Harris fastened the medal to Max's harness, the crowd rose in a standing ovation. Children cheered, veterans saluted, and more than a few eyes glistened with tears, including those of Martha Wilson, who stood ramrod straight at the edge of the stage, applauding with uncharacteristic abandon. For Max, the medal meant nothing. The applause, the ceremony, the official recognition, these were human constructs, meaningless to a dog who had simply done what his nature and training had prepared him to do. What mattered to him was simpler, the familiar presence of Cooper beside him, Caroline's gentle hand on his back, the sense of rightness that came with having a purpose again. As the ceremony concluded and the formal reception began, Max found himself surrounded by admirers of all ages. Children approached under their parents' watchful guidance to pet him carefully, many of them asking about the scars that still marked the right side of his face. "Those are his hero marks," Cooper explained to a wide-eyed 7-year-old who had asked why Max looked different on one side. "He got them saving people he cared about." "Like a superhero?" the child asked. "Exactly like that," Cooper confirmed, meeting his daughter's gaze over the child's head with a smile. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Deborah Jenkins approached with a small wrapped package. "A little homecoming gift," she explained, handing it to Caroline. "For Max's first day back on duty." Inside was a handcrafted leather collar, the nameplate bearing not just Max but also his rank and badge number from his days as an active K-9 officer. "So he never forgets who he really is," Deborah said softly, "no matter what anyone else might see when they look at him." As the autumn sun began its descent over Oak Ridge Lane, casting long golden shadows across the park, Max sat contentedly between Cooper and Caroline on a bench near the pond. His medal glinted in the fading light, the new collar comfortable around his neck. Around them, the last of the celebration continued, children playing, neighbors chatting, a community united by the unexpected hero who had taught them all to look beyond appearances. "Well, boy," Cooper said quietly, his hand resting on Max's head. "Ready for your second act." Max's response was to lean against his former handler's leg, his amber eyes alert and at peace simultaneously. The face that had once frightened neighbors now represented something entirely different to the community, not a liability, but a testament to courage, not a threat, but a promise of protection. The scars remained, they always would, but the fear they once inspired had been transformed into something else entirely: respect, admiration, and the recognition that sometimes the most beautiful souls wore the most visible wounds. In the gathering twilight of Oak Ridge Lane, as streetlights began to illuminate the path home, The shepherd with the damaged face and the hero's heart had finally found his true place, not despite his scars, but because of them, and all they represented about a life devoted to service, sacrifice, and unconditional love. We all wear scars from life's battles, some visible, others hidden in the heart. Max's story reminds us that our greatest wounds often become our most powerful testimony. Like many of you who've weathered life's storms, this loyal shepherd found himself cast aside when his appearance no longer matched society's expectations, despite a lifetime of service. How many of us understand that feeling? The world is quick to dismiss what it fears or doesn't understand, especially as we age. But Max's courage teaches us that our truest value never diminishes, even when others fail to see it. His disfigurement, once viewed as frightening, became the mark of his heroism,